Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back for another bookish conversation with a children's literature author and illustrator. Today, I'm talking with Sara Ackerman and Alona Millgram, the author-illustrator duo behind their newest picture book, Challah for Shabbat Tonight. This beautiful picture book celebrates Jewish joy and intergenerational love as it follows a girl and her grandmother preparing for Shabbat dinner by baking traditional challah from scratch. This book warmed my heart in so many ways, and I cannot wait to talk to both Sara and Alona all about it. So let's just do that. Sara and Alona, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for having us.
Happy to. This book, as I mentioned, it warmed my heart. It gave me all the feels, from the lyrical words to the beautiful illustrations. And I'm just so grateful that I can talk to you both at the same time today and talk to Sara about the words and the beautiful story. And then also, Alona, you to pick your brain about how you brought it to life so beautifully in those images. But before we get to the book, let's start with your typical introductions and hellos to the episode. Sara, why don't we begin with you? And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your journey to children's literature and specifically your journey to your newest book that we're talking about today.
Sure. So I am a longtime early childhood educator. That's my background. I recently went back to school to become a school librarian. So my professional life was immersed in picture books. I'm also a mother. So my personal life was also immersed in picture books. I wrote for a long time before my first publication earlier this year. And this book specifically, it was my first rhyming manuscript. And it was partially a writing exercise. I was trying to teach myself how to dissect and write in metered verse. And when I was thinking of a topic that would lend itself very well to a rhyming text, I thought about the pattern and the rhythm of baking. And that's sort of how the words first started to come together for this book.
Have you always wanted to write picture books? I find a lot of educators and educators that shift into librarians, they have this deep love for books. Is it something that was calling to you for a while?
Yeah, for a long time. My daughter is 12 now, and I think I started when she was about 2. And so, yes, about 10 years, it's been percolating.
So this is a big celebration now that all of this is finally happening. You get to put those books into other readers' hands. Oh,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Alona, how about you? What is your journey to illustration like?
Well, I always wanted to, since I was a kid surrounded by illustrated book, I wanted to be an illustrator. But it was like, like a dream, like a hobby, and I put it aside for many years. And when I started thinking about applying to university, I said, well, let's give it a try and see if I can get accepted to an art school. And well, I got accepted, and they took my whole path to this place I dreamed about, but never really thought I would actually live to. And well, in school, it was also about design, and illustration was just something I always loved, but I never really thought I would end up doing. And I just I just rolled also after finishing school in illustration field, in advertising and packaging, but um, but illustrating for kids was always what brought me into this field. And after I started in children's publishing, I found my place, the place that I loved and that I worked to reach to. So yeah, I think it's really great.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You made it there. You finally made it there. And one thing I didn't realize when I was preparing for the episode and to talk to both of you, of course, I stalk you all my authors and illustrators online and to get your backlist and your backstories. And one of my favorite books, I didn't realize that you created the cover for, which was The Impossible Destiny of Cutie Crackle. And I thought, oh, I feel like I know you now because now I know something that was such a personal favorite for me and that you did that cover. So that was a fun connection I was able to make. Yeah. It made me realize that, I have so many books that I love and so many covers that I love that now I realize I need to do a bit more investigating when I read them so that I can find out who made those covers. So that was, yeah, thank you for that. It's one of my favorites.
Thank you too. It's so great to hear it.
So let's talk about the book that the two of you have together. It's, as I said in the opening, it is just beautiful. It's so beautiful in terms of the lyrical rhyming language. It is beautiful in terms of those sweet illustrations. But then you have the story of the family, the tradition, the food. It's an emotional book that definitely gave me all the feels and brought me back, even though I don't have experience in making challah like that. I do have experience with a grandma, who would bake what was important to her with me. And it's just such a beautiful book. And I know, Sara, you talked a little bit about the inspiration behind it being kind of challenging yourself to write in a certain way, and that story came to be. But I'm hoping that you'll tell listeners, for those that haven't read the book yet, it's only been out for a couple of months at the time that the episode will release. Tell us a little bit about the book from your perspective.
Sure. So, it is a book about bread. It's a book about the best bread, the most delicious bread. Um, but it's also a book about, as you said, it's about joy, it's about love. A lot of people expect that when a Jewish author writes a book about challah, a child making challah with their grandma, that is what they did as a child. That is never what I did as a child, but I like to tell people that although nothing in this book is real, it's not a memoir. Everything in it is true. Challah is the best bread, and this is exactly how you make it. Grandmas are the best people, and you get to do more special things sometimes with your grandparents than you do with your family that you live with all the time if it's not your grandparents. Um, and so all of those things were things that were important to me to include in the book because I think they are very, very true, even though that is not how I spent my particular childhood with my grandparents.
I love that you just said that. I love that because you're right. Some of us might come to the book with that experience. Some of us might come to the book without it. And it doesn't matter. It's this universal idea of that happening, not the actual, event that may or may not have happened to you around it. Now, I know you mentioned why it was written in rhyming. Did you ever at one point think maybe you would change it to a typical prose, or was once you found it in that format, was that always it? Because personally, as a reader, I loved the rhyming. I loved the cadence. I loved the rhythm of it. But I'm curious if you ever went back and forth or if that was always the plan.
I never considered writing this in prose ever. When I look at my published books or my books that are under contract to be published, it's about 50-50 rhyming and prose, and I always know, and there is always a reason. The rhyme has to enhance the story and it has to bring another layer to it. And in this case, like I mentioned, for me, it brings out the predictability of baking, the coziness of baking, the pattern, the way you do it the same every time. And so for me, it was always going to be in rhyme.
It works. It works so well, and I love hearing that rationale behind it. It relates to the concept and the
Yeah.
conceptual nature of the baking behind it. So let's see. I'm going to switch. I'm going to switch over to you, Alona. One of the things that I loved about the book, right? It has the beautiful dance of words. It has that beautiful connection between a grandmother and a granddaughter. But what I loved was how that emotion came through as I keep saying, like, you just get the feels when you read this book. And that is partly because of the words, but it is also partly because of those beautiful, inviting illustrations. And so I'd love to start with just a really big question for you, which is how do you go about taking such a beautiful sentiment like the words in this book and figuring out how to bring that to life on the page with such an emotion that comes across? Like, how did you attempt to do this?
Wow, okay, it is a big question.
It is.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is the text triggered the emotions in me. So when I first read the text, it was I really, Sarah, it was amazing. I fell in love with it. It just touched me. And the words are about baking, but the feeling is really about family and connection between the girl and her grandma. It's like they have a little secret. The whole family gathers by the end of the day to eat the challah, but they're the only ones that were creating it. The process is theirs. So it's kind of like their own memories, the child's memories, and it's kind of triggered my own childhood memories with my grandma, which also didn't bake challah, but we did bake pies together. So it's also baking, and and I took the feelings and the memories and kind of like poured all of it to the illustrations, starting with the characters. It was also kind of the official way to go. I start with the characters. I had the girl in the beginning, but then I was like searching for the right grandma, and the one I chose in the end was one inspired by my own grandma because of the memories again. And after it was approved by the publisher, I went ahead for the actual sketches, planning of the book, the compositions and everything. And every time I went to a spread and started to think about how I'll approach this spread, I went to the words and I thought, what the emotion, how does the feelings and the images supposed to flow to achieve that, what I'm feeling. And I try to go with the rhythm of Sarah's text. And well, I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly or if I'm just like,
Yes,
going
no,
around.
keep going. It's exactly what I hope to learn. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it's really it's a back and forth of me, the text, and all the spreads I just have in front of me. I plan in the beginning the composition, so I have all the spreads in front of me, and I also need to make sure when you flip the page, you get the right feeling and the right flow of the illustration. And well, yeah, it just a back and forth. of working everything together, all the elements together.
Well,
I hope it ends.
oh, you did. You did. And I really can see why now I had that emotional, all the feels kind of response as a reader, because it started with the words, right? And that cadence and the beautiful story behind it. But then you felt that and channeled that into the illustrations in your way also. One of the things I love that you did, well, I love a lot of things. The color scheme I just loved. It feels like you could just, it felt like a warm, cozy baking kind of scene. But I love how on some pages you had the spread, but then on the pages where they were baking or they were doing something related to the bread, you had those square cutouts with, step 1, step 2, step 3. And I just love the back and forth that just showed the relationship and the connection, and then the baking, and then the relationship and the connection, and back to the baking. And it was just such a beautiful way to go back and forth and see how that kind of tradition evolved and to help them have the relationship they have. I just, that really jumped out at me, and I loved how you did that.
You. These parts were actually inspired by comics. When I first planned it, I really separated the parts of the actions and the characters, and eventually just turned out to be a whole illustration. But because of each action had so much meaning, they were all important. I couldn't just like draw one of them. So I had to find a solution to have them all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. And as you said, when I read it, I couldn't help but sink into my own memories a bit. With one of my grandparents, it was homemade chocolate cake. Not from Can never do that from a box. I just remember it was homemade chocolate cake and the boiling water, and hearing her tell me, not this way, do it this way. And with another grandmother, it was homemade applesauce and homemade apple pie. And Sarah, your book just elicits those wonderful memories and connection. And as it goes through the end of the book, and Alona, you mentioned this, it moves from the very beautiful relationship between granddaughter and grandmother to the whole family towards the end, and this beautiful celebration and dinner and conversation and contentment and enjoyment. And I was just so struck by the back and forth between that relationship and that bigger picture of where it all ended up. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about that structure. That I know you said the rhyming was always meant to be, but how did you decide how to take such a beautiful big concept like the relationship and the connections between family and the tradition behind it, and bring it all together like that? It was just such a beautiful way to end.
Thank you. Well, Shabbat dinner, or for non-Jewish people, like a Friday night dinner, is just commonly a time where you invite, where the whole family eats together, where you might invite, your extended family or your neighbors. And so I wanted to make sure at the end that that this sort of private moment and special day, which is obviously something that they do all the time, then extends and is shared with the wider community. And one thing that I love is at the end, when the whole family is gathered, there's one spread where Alona shows a view from the outside looking in. And I
Yes.
loved that because it's just the reader is on the outside looking in, but it's also like an invitation, come inside. And then almost immediately following, you have the recipe. That wasn't always there because, like I said, my grandmother never made challah, and the recipe that I used is copyrighted, so not by me. So I loved that juxtaposition of going from the private to the wider community, and then to the reader outside looking in. and then this invitation, come join us, bake with your family.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned it. I did love that view. It was love on a page.
Mm.
Truly, truly, it was love on a page. So, Sarah, do you make it now? Do you attempt to
I
to
do, yes.
start
I
your
I had made it a few times before I ever, decided to write. I like to bake. I think also though the bakery challah is very good. I have very good bakeries in my neighborhood, so I
own?
never have to worry about that. After writing this book was not the first time I baked it. I didn't bake it as a child, but I do as an adult. But once I started writing the book, I was baking a lot more. Like it was right, bake. How does this feel? What does it look like? What are the variations of ingredients? Which recipe do I like the best? Um, and then since publication, it's been even more baking because people when I do events, sometimes we do baking events where we do story time and baking or story time and braiding, and then you take it home and bake. So there was one point this summer where my freezer was just full, and it was only challah that I was like testing out different kinds of braiding. Because I knew these places were inviting me, and I was like, I bake for myself, but now baking for an audience, like I have to like get really serious about it. And there is actually one discrepancy between the the text of the book and the recipe that we ended up going with when our editor asked, about grandma's recipe. I said, no, no, there's no grandma's recipe. We had never talked about it. I never told her that this was true story. I assumed we all were treating it as fiction. I did actually end up finding an old cookbook of my grandmother's. There is a challah recipe in there, and she never baked it because it's the only one that has no notes on it. She always got hers from the bakery too. So when I was writing the book, it's an egg white glaze, which is sometimes how people do it. You take the yolk out and you just brush on the egg white. It makes it very shiny. And the recipe that they got the permissions to use, it's a whole egg, and it's better. The whole egg is better. I've switched. I've switched since then. That's why there's like a slight difference between the text and the recipe. In the
Well, what a fun combination of things the book has been bringing to your life. I would love
Yeah.
to read, write, bake,
Mhm.
bake, just repeat all the time. What fun author visits. Oh my gosh, the kids must have such a wonderful time.
Yeah.
Oh, so I know that your book has just come out pretty recently at the time of publication, but is there anything that you are currently working on or have in the works that you might want to give listeners a sneak peek into?
Sure. I mean, I always have things that I'm working on. I have things under contract that aren't announced. I have things under contract that there's just not much to say about, but I'm really excited about my next picture book that's coming out April 1st, 2025. Um, it's called Woods and Words, The Story of Poet Mary Oliver. It's a biography. It was the first book I ever sold. It's the fourth to come out. It will be my first published book in prose. Like I said, I always know from the beginning, and a book about Mary Oliver was never going to rhyme because most of her published poetry is in free verse. Um, and it's a biography about her life with writing and with nature.
I
It's
love
illustrated by Naoko Stoop. I want to mention.
Wow. I love Mary Oliver's and I love nonfiction picture book biographies because I learn about so many people. So I will keep my eye out for that. So April Fool's Day, it comes out next year.
Yeah, right at
Congratulations.
the beginning of Poetry Month, National Poetry Month here.
Right. That's perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, where can listeners find both of you online so they can follow your work, see when more of your work comes out? Any place you want to direct them online?
I have a website that's just my full name, sarahollyackerman.com. I'm not a super social media presence, but I do try to post most often on Instagram. And it's again at Sarah Holly Ackerman.
Okay. And Alona, where can we find you?
Same, my website is my name, alonamillgram.com, and my Instagram also Alona Millgram. If you find one of them, there's a link to the other, so you just got it covered.
Great. Well, I will make sure to put links to both the websites and the Instagram handles in the show notes. Of course, links to this wonderful, beautiful book so that listeners can find that quickly and easily as well. Thank you both for coming onto the podcast today. I really love getting the backstory behind the book and seeing how the two of you brought such a beautiful story to life. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for your time as well.
Thank you for your time, Stephanie. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. You too. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you inside the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.